I'm sorry, I was at fault too. Is that all anybody's looking for?
When Kody Brown initially had his eye on Coyote Pass, he described for his family a vision that sounded like the American dream. Open spaces as far as the eye could see under the Arizona sun. A home where his wives and children each had a place, a portion of the land, a portion of the future. It was to be the jewel of the Brown family legacy, a reflection of faith, family, and togetherness. He spoke of it ad nauseum, sitting on his wives' couches, drawing out plans of 4 houses in a row, children playing on common fields, and one big vision of a family tied together for eternity. Cameras captured it all, and fans were assured this was the future. Coyote Pass would mend fences, create hope, and secure Kody's legacy as the patriarch who made a plural marriage work. But beneath the dream, there were fissures. Coyote Pass wasn't an easy buy. It cost millions of dollars, all broken down into loans, payments, and legal arrangements that few people really comprehended. In order to make it happen, each of the wives was asked to give up. Janelle sold off portions of her savings. Christine resisted, questioning if the money trail held up. Mary quietly followed along, her voice rarely heard. And Robyn? She was situated in the middle, her name being added to papers and titles that looked strange. No one wanted to challenge Kody at first. He spoke with conviction, with the booming voice of a man who felt God himself had ordained him to bring his family onto this land. "This is where we will build our forever," he vowed. But the financial pressure was evident from the start. Payments on Coyote Pass mounted, even as other family costs drained what little savings the Browns had. Then came the conflicts. Christine demanded the tough questions. Why is Robyn's name always listed first? Why are her debts paid first, her home secured, while the rest of us are left waiting? Kody dismissed her, saying to have faith and trust the plan. But trust was already in jeopardy. Janelle, the practical one, did extra work, transferring funds from one account to the other, hoping to keep the dream alive. She had faith in the land. She had faith that one day her children would be standing on acres that they could own. But she knew also about the dangers, and late at night she allowed herself to be haunted by her doubts. And Mary? She sat silently, observing it all fall apart. Her voice was the softest, but her eyes witnessed everything. The family she had assisted in creating was breaking apart, and Coyote Pass wasn't mending them. It was splitting them further apart. Nevertheless, Kody plowed ahead. Cameras rolled as he stood on the barren Arizona land, sweeping his arm toward the horizon. "This is it," he declared. "This is where the Browns will flourish." He assured the wives that when the land was paid for, when the titles were taken, they would all construct. But even as he said those words, the reality was catching up. Borrowings weren't being repaid timely. Taxes were adding up. Such hidden debts associated with LLCs and clandestine financial moves were lurking in the shadows. There were documents that the wives never knew about, signatures which they never recalled giving. The so-called dream of Coyote Pass was already bordering on nightmare. The family tension came to a boiling point on an evening when Christine, in the kitchen, finally voiced aloud what everyone had been whispering. What if this land destroys us instead of saves us? That question reverberated like thunder throughout the family. The ensuing silence was denser than words. For deep inside, every wife already knew the answer. And in court years later, when the judge weighed the evidence, he referred to Coyote Pass as not a dream, but a financial trap. But to see how we got there, we need to look back, to the start, when the land was bought, when the cash was exchanged, and when Kody's empire started its gradual unraveling. This is not just the story of land. It's the story of power, betrayal, and control. And the truth of how Kody lost everything on Coyote Pass begins with the lies he told to make the dream possible. And as we'll see in the next chapter, those lies had paper trails. When folks say numbers don't lie, they are serious. Yet in the Brown family, numbers were manipulated, concealed, and deceived until truth oozed out in court. The initial fissure in the facade came not in a blaze of confrontation, but in a thin manila envelope Janelle had opened in 2020. It contained tax bills and notices of delinquency for plots of land on Coyote Pass. Janelle had always been the practical one, paying bills, balancing accounts, reconciling groceries to mortgages. She knew what money did not look like when it wasn't there. But what she discovered that day wasn't missed payments. It was more, the county property taxes on Coyote Pass weren't paid in full. Delinquency notices were stacking up. And buried within the stack was money paid not from their joint family LLC, but by another entity, one Janelle had never even heard of before. Its name? KN&R Holdings LLC. Christine would later refer to that as the beginning of the end. When Janelle confronted Kody, he brushed her off, shooing it away like a nuisance fly. "It's just a vehicle for handling the finances," he told her. "You don't need to worry about it." But Janelle did worry, because this wasn't about shuffling numbers from column to column. This was control. KN&R, Kody, Nathan, and Robyn, was more than a business shell. It was the funnel, the siphon, the place where money destined for the family was slipped away quietly. Paper trail was incriminating. Wire transfers cascaded out of Family Traditions LLC, the account intended to hold show earnings, book contracts, and family business, directly into KN&R Holdings. There, it bifurcated: house payments on Robyn's estate, security expenditures on the Flagstaff property, high-end credit card charges. In the meantime, Christine was informed that there wasn't enough for Isabel's surgery. Janelle was instructed to put off constructing her ideal home. Mary was kept entirely in the dark. The genius of it, if you could say such a thing, was in its simplicity. On paper, KN&R Holdings appeared real. But in action, it became the treasury in which Kody and Robyn hoarded assets and instructed the other wives to buckle down. By the time the forensic accountant brought the records to trial, the figures spoke louder than any emotional testimony. More than $300,000 had been routed through KN&R in less than 2 years. And it wasn't just the funds, it was the intent, the secrecy, the betrayal. Christine recalls when she first laid eyes on the discovery documents. "It was like the floor had been pulled out from under me," she said. All those years of being instructed to give up, to wait patiently, to trust, it was all a lie. The accountant singled out one of those transactions in specific, $25,000, listed as estate planning. That hadn't been spent on a family trust. That had been spent to acquire a deed, in Robyn's name alone. Kody fidgeted in the courtroom when that exhibit was shown on the wall. Robyn wiped her eyes with a tissue. Christine and Janelle sat unmoving, hands clasped, their silence more deafening than shrieks. But the paper trails didn't end there. They uncovered something else. Something worse, emails, dozens of them. Exhibit after exhibit depicted Kody emailing attorneys, accountants, even TLC executives, omitting the other wives. He called Christine and Janelle unstable. He called Mary disengaged. He referred to himself as the sole patriarch of the family's assets. The words pierced deeper than the figures. They were evidence that this wasn't merely poor bookkeeping. It was strategy. It was manipulation. And it paid off, until Christine made up her mind that silence was no longer an option. One evening in Flagstaff, following another shouting argument over money, she plopped down in her kitchen and started scribbling down everything she could remember. Dates, discussions, broken promises. She had no idea at the time, but she was creating her own paper trail, a witness statement one day that would destroy Kody's empire. The Coyote Pass dream was shattering, not because of money or land, but because the truth was finally emerging out of the darkness. And once it's said, the truth doesn't fit into the envelope again. But the question was, how much more was there waiting to be uncovered? And who within the family was ready to come forward and say it? For the next bombshell wasn't going to come from Christine or Janelle. It would be an internal, from-within Kody and Robyn's residence. All trials have an instant. One tipping point where the mood changes, where jurors forward lean, where gallery whispers turn to shocked silence. For Kody Brown, that was the moment when the attorney for the plaintiffs put a new witness on the stand. Not Christine, not Janelle, not even Mary, It was Mindy Jessup, Robyn's niece, the nanny, the woman who had spent almost 3 years living within Kody and Robyn's home in Flagstaff. The courtroom, already strained, became motionless as she entered. She wore a simple outfit, no drama, no showmanship. Just a gray blazer, her hair pulled back, her expression resolute. No notes. She didn't require them. She had lived this. The judge administered the oath, and she sat down with the solemn determination of a woman who knew the gravity of her words. "Miss Jessup," started Anna Kararma, attorney for Christine and Janelle, "how long did you work for Kody and Robyn Brown?" "Late 2019 through mid-2022, she answered. "I was a nanny and an occasional tutor for the children." "How many times were you in the home?" 5 or 6 days a week. "Typically 8 hours a day, occasionally more." That hit with the impact of a rock in water. The jury changed direction. The reporters jotted. Because this was not just a sitter. This was an insider. This was a person who witnessed all. "What was your compensation, Miss Jessup?" $80,000 annually. The figure hung in the air. Christine and Janelle didn't blink, but the silence was deafening. The jury was aware of the arithmetic. $80,000 for a nanny, while Christine pleaded for assistance with the surgery for Isabel, while Janelle was informed that there wasn't enough money to cover her foundation for the home. And then the verdict. "Who paid you, Miss Jessup?" K&R Holdings. The name reverberated in the room. The very same shell company that had sucked Family Traditions LLC dry. The siphon. The vault. The evidence. Kararma strode over to the evidence screen, displaying the bank statements. Every other Friday. Direct deposits. K&R Holdings. Like clockwork. But the final kick wasn't financial. It was psychological. "During the time you worked," Kararma inquired, "did you hear Kody and Robyn talking about the other wives?" Mindy nodded. "Often. Can you provide an example?" Her eyes flashed, not with fear, but with something more substantial. Memory. There was one evening in 2020. Christine called regarding Isabel's surgery. Kody was pacing back and forth. He told her Christine was attempting to manipulate him, that she was utilizing Isabel's pain to make him feel guilty. Robyn instructed him not to yield, that if he did, the others would believe they could control him. The following silence was crushing. Christine wiped her eyes on the bench but did not crack. Janelle tightened her jaw. The jurors looked around at each other, their cheeks set in aghast expressions. The rules of COVID, the no-shows at surgeries, the abandonment of children. It was not bad luck. It was strategy. Detachment turned into a weapon, sanctioned by rules only obeyed when it suited. Mindy went on. Christine and Janelle were the noise. They discussed cutting them off from finances, about not answering their calls, about pretending when the cameras returned. They weren't attempting to repair the family. They were remaking it. Her words did not tremble. She was not bitter. She was not enraged. She was clinical, surgical, cutting through decades of lies with realities that nobody could ignore. The defense attempted to shake her. "Miss Jessup, weren't you well paid by my clients? Isn't it that you broke off on bad terms?" "I left," she replied, her gaze never wavering from his. "Because I could no longer be party to it." And thus she emerged the trial's unlikely heroine, the soft-spoken voice speaking the hard-hitting truth. The gallery hummed. Reporters tweeted out fast takeouts. One juror dabbed at her eyes. And in the rear of the courtroom, Kody's mask broke. He lurched in his seat, muttering abrasively to his lawyers. Robyn wept openly, mascara smudging her face. Because it wasn't Christine and Janelle versus Kody anymore. It was one of their own. An insider, a whistleblower. And what she had yet to uncover would make Coyote Pass a dream postponed instead of a dream shattered. Because hidden in her testimony was a piece of information no one anticipated. A secret meeting, off camera, where the destiny of the land had been decided already. Without the other wives even knowing. The din of the courtroom still resonated hours later from Mindy Jessup's explosive testimony. But Anna Kararma had more. She allowed the silence to settle, allowed the jurors to absorb it, and leaned in then like a maestro poised to lead the orchestra. Miss Jessup, she said with all the calm in the world, you testified to overhearing people talking. I want to inquire about one of those conversations. A meeting about the future of Coyote Pass. The air grew heavy in an instant. Even the judge moved uncomfortably in his seat. Yes, Mindy replied, her tone unyielding. Who was at this meeting? Kody, Robyn, a real estate agent, Brian H., and a financial planner. I was home. I was tasked with keeping the kids occupied, but the door was ajar. I could listen. And what was said? Mindy breathed. She did not hurry. She did not dramatize. She spoke with the accuracy of recollection. They discussed dividing Coyote Pass in a manner different than they had been informed. Not into plots equal to one another. Not into co-ownership. Kody stated the others didn't have the vision to construct there. That Christine and Janelle didn't merit to invest in property they didn't believe in. He stated the land should be brought under K&R Holdings exclusively. The room was filled with murmurs. The judge struck his gavel. Order was restored, but just. Did he say the plaintiffs' names? Yes, he said Christine would never construct there because she was too emotional, and Janelle would eventually get in line if she wanted access to the family. He said Mary was irrelevant, and that the future belonged only to Robyn and her children. Christine bowed her head. Janelle sat rigid, staring straight forward. The betrayal was old news, but to hear it verified, under oath, was a knife twisted deeper. Was there any objection to this proposal? Kararma inquired. The agent hesitated. He said it would be suspicious to transfer ownership like that. But Kody dismissed him. Robyn reassured him, said, the others won't object. They never do. And then they laughed. They laughed at how the cameras would never be able to tell the difference. The words stung like punches. On the defense bench, Kody's jaw clamped shut. He grunted something to Robyn, who gripped his arm frantically. The jury, however, did not miss a beat. They leaned in, faces set. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was deception. On purpose. Documented. Cold. And then Kararma played the ace card. Miss Jessup, do you recognize this document? She held up a real estate memorandum, dated early 2020, with proposed reallocation of Coyote Pass plots. Yes, Mindy said. That's what they were considering that day. And who signed it? Kody, Robyn. The courtroom gasped. The paper trail, coupled with Mindy's testimony, created a heart-wrenching portrait. Coyote Pass wasn't merely mismanaged. It was taken. A dream marketed as family unity had been stripped, reorganized, and directed into the pockets of two. The defense flailed. Objection, Your Honor. Speculative. Hearsay! But the judge signaled no. Overruled. The witness has first-hand knowledge. The jury scribbled notes furiously. The gallery whispered louder than before. And outside, reporters tweeted breaking headlines that spread like wildfire. Christine looked at Kody, not with rage, not with vengeance. With sorrow. A sorrow that arises when betrayal is no longer deniable. Janelle, however, was steel. Her jaw was clamped, her fists clenched. She had struggled for that land. She had pleaded for honesty. And now the truth was revealed. There was more, however. Mindy paused, her voice softer now. There's something else, she said. What is it? Kararma asked. They schemed. To sell half of it. The courtroom fell still. To whom? Mindy swallowed. A developer. They told us if the wives kept fighting, they'd quietly sell off a section and say it was for taxes. Robyn actually said, they'll be thankful when the debt is paid off. But actually, they just wanted the money. Gasps, shock. Even the judge's brows creased. The Coyote Pass dream, the legacy, the promise, was never to be constructed. It was to be used, liquidated, cashed out. And by that point, in the minds of most jurors, the verdict was already taking shape. Kody changed positions in his seat, his face red with rage. He resembled a man trapped, a man whose empire of silence had at last imploded inward. But Anna Kararma wasn't finished. She held back the sharpest dagger for last. Miss Jessup, one last question. Did you hear Kody Brown say the perfect marriage when he was talking about Christine? Yes, Mindy replied quietly. He told it to the planner. He said, "She thinks she left me, but she'll never be free. The perfect marriage was always a lie, and I'll make sure no one forgets it." The courtroom came to a standstill. Christine's eyes welled up with tears. The jury gazed at Kody in shock, not at a patriarch, not at a husband, but at a man who had been exposed. The judge slammed the gavel once more. Order, but order was lost. The truth was revealed, and the Coyote Pass dream shattered. The courtroom had never been the same since Mindy testified. It wasn't about numbers or LLC transfers anymore. It wasn't even about favoritism and broken trust. It was betrayal so calculated, so intentional, that the jurors could sense the cold steel of it slicing through the air. And Christine? She sat mutely, tears brimming on her lids, not of weakness but of recognition, for this was the evidence she had always secretly believed but could never demonstrate. Janelle was impassive, fists clenched tightly against her knees, every fiber in her body resisting the temptation to blurt out of turn. The judge commanded order again and again, but gallery whispers were insistent. "Did you hear that? They were going to sell it. He never intended for the wives to own land. Coyote Pass was a scam from the beginning." The words rang out like a song of reproach. When the jury returned after an abrupt recess, the attorney for the plaintiffs, Anna Chararma, was prepared to strike again. She recognized momentum had been shifted, and in trials, momentum counts. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, walking deliberately across the floor, "we've seen bank statements. We've heard from experts. We've followed the money. But today, through Miss Jessup's testimony, we've heard the truth behind the curtain. This wasn't mismanagement. This wasn't a mistake. This was a deliberate deception designed to strip Christine, Janelle, and Mary of their futures, while Kody and Robyn built a kingdom of their own." Her voice rose as she turned, pointing toward Kody. "He promised them equality. He promised them partnership. He promised them a legacy at Coyote Pass. And what did they receive? Lies, manipulation, and betrayal." The jury was captivated. Even the judge appeared to be taking in every sentence. And then she hit them between the eyes. "Let me remind you, these were not merely wives. These were business partners. Family Traditions LLC. They shared income. They raised kids. They made sacrifices. And when the time arrived for openness, what did the defendants do? She held a document high as the heavens. They formed KN&R Holdings. They moved funds. They muted voices. They snickered at the cameras, never knowing. Kody snapped. "That's not true," he yelled, rising up, his face red, his hands quivering with anger. "This is all lies. They don't know what it takes to keep a family going." The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. Brown, sit down. You will not disrupt this court again." Kody's chest was heaving. Robyn was clinging to his arm, entreating him under her breath to keep his head. But the jury saw it. The glint of anger. The mask torn away. The desperate man behind the patriarch. Anna Chararma didn't bat an eye. She faced the jury again, her voice unwavering. "Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the truth speaks louder than any lawyer ever could." The defense scrambled to salvage what was left. "Members of the jury," Silas Croft, Kody's lawyer, started with strained calm, "we need to keep in mind, this is a family issue. Families fight. Families reorganize. Families mess up. But fraud? Willful deception? No. My clients had good intentions. They loved their children. They toiled for decades to get this land. The plaintiffs are resentful, and they wish to rewrite history." But his words sounded hollow. Each sentence sounded like a pretext. Each explanation a thin disguise over the tsunami of evidence. And then the day's final blow. A plaintiff witness was called. The real estate broker, Brian H. Under oath, he corroborated Mindy's account. "Yes, I did attend a meeting. Yes, there was talk of redistributing the land. And yes, it was apparent that Christine, Janelle, and Mary were being left out. The words Kody used were, quote, 'This land is for the future, not the past.'" The jury sat in stunned silence. "The future?" Chararma asked. "Yes, by that he meant Robyn and her children." Christine closed her eyes, as if steadying herself against a wave of hurt. Janelle shook her head slowly, her lips compressed thin. The air in the courtroom was thick with betrayal so raw it almost seemed to choke the very air from the room. For years, viewers had watched Coyote Pass as a dream, a symbol, a promised land where the family could live in peace. And now, it was revealed as a lie, an empty sales pitch to keep hope alive while the real business, the draining of money, took place in secret. The day concluded with the judge's gavel coming down hard. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning. But the jury did not glance Kody's way as they exited. They did not glance Robyn's. They glanced at Christine, at Janelle, at the women who were silenced, gaslit, mocked, and were now seated vindicated, not out of sympathy, but because the truth was no longer deniable. Kody collapsed into his seat, hands shaking. Robyn quietly sobbed, tissues heaped upon her. And as Christine and Janelle emerged from the courtroom, measured steps, unflinching faces, reporters pushed forward. Cameras clicked. Questions shouted. Christine, Janelle, do you feel vindicated? What happens to Coyote Pass now? Do you think Kody will lose everything? But they didn't speak. They didn't have to, because the verdict hadn't been announced. But the narrative? The narrative had been rewritten already. And tomorrow, when the judge came back to the bench, that tale would have its last crushing page. The last day of the trial dawned with a gray sky. Clouds lingered over Flagstaff like a threat, as if even nature comprehended the gravity of what was to transpire. The courtroom was filled up early. Jurors, reporters, area residents who had been following the Brown story for years. Christine and Janelle came quietly, wearing modest dresses, their faces serene but inscrutable. Kody and Robyn arrived after they did, gliding like ghosts, their formerly defiant spirit turned to fear. When the judge ascended to the bench, silence descended. His eyes swept the courtroom, his face stern but not unforgiving. He handled the verdict papers with a slow deliberation, as if each phrase was weighed heavily in his hands. In the case of Brown versus Brown, he started, his voice traveling across the quiet room. This court finds. The jurors straightened. Christine and Janelle held their hands together in their laps. Robyn gripped a tissue so hard it tore in her fist. On the charge of breach of fiduciary duty for the plaintiffs. Christine let out a sharp breath. Janelle's jaw shook barely. On the charge of unjust enrichment for the plaintiffs. Robyn sniffled, sobs tearing at the quiet. Kody formed fists and shook his head in shock. And on the charge of willful deception and financial misrepresentation about the Coyote Pass property for the plaintiffs. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, a few audible shouts of, "Finally!" from the gallery. The judge banged his gavel for order, but his voice remained firm. As relief, this court decrees the liquidation of KN&R Holdings. The money will be reallocated to the plaintiffs for $1.2 million. Coyote Pass shall be put in financial receivership until appropriate reallocation can be ascertained. Emotional damages for $250,000 shall also be granted to Christine Brown and $250,000 to Janelle Brown. Christine covered her mouth, crying. Janelle lowered her head, shaking her shoulders as years of silent suffering finally melted into vindication. Kody's face went red. He leaned in, his voice shattering the silence. This isn't fair. You don't know what it's like to head a family, to bear the burden of all of them. I sacrificed my life for this. The judge's gavel came down. Mr. Brown, please be seated. This is not your pulpit. This is a court of law. The words stung deeper than any verdict. For decades, Kody had dominated the stage, dictated the story, written the script. Now, in one sentence, the fantasy was extinguished. Reporters scrambled for the exits. Racing to bring breaking news. Kody loses everything. Coyote Pass foreclosed. Court rules in favor of Christine and Janelle. Robyn wept freely, mascara running down her face. She grasped for Kody's hand, but he pulled it away, his eyes fixed blankly on the bench as if the end had come. Christine stood up hesitantly, elegantly. She turned to Janelle, and the two women hugged each other. Not dramatically, not for the sake of performance, but for themselves. Survivors, winners, collaborators in truth. And then Christine did what everyone didn't see coming. She glanced straight at Kody. For the first time in years, she looked him in the eye without fear, without hesitation. "Goodbye," she said softly. The sound traveled. The gallery heard it. The jury heard it. And Kody, he heard it above all. Because this wasn't about Coyote Pass. This wasn't about money. This was about the final shred of power he'd ever exercised over Christine being severed in two. The judge slammed his gavel down one last time. Court is adjourned. And suddenly, it was done. The jurors made their exit. The reporters mobbed. Christine and Janelle stepped into sunlight, tears shining but feet steady. Kody collapsed, a shadow of the man who had named himself a leader. Robyn buried her face in her hands, unable to look anyone in the eye. But as the courthouse cleared, one question lingered. Because in the frenzy of the verdict, a letter fell from a file on the defense table. A stamped paper, half concealed, with bold red writing. U.S. District Court, Federal Investigation Subpoena. The clerk tucked it back into the stack hastily, but a few keen-eyed reporters saw it. And in a matter of seconds, rumors flew. This wasn't over. Coyote Pass had fallen. Kody had lost everything. But what if the federal government were next on the list? What if this wasn't a mere civil defeat, but the start of a criminal trial? The courtroom was silent, quiet, heavy. When the judge spoke the last sentence of the verdict, for the plaintiffs, the weight of decades descended in a crash. Christine's shoulders trembled as quiet tears fell, but her tears were not tears of defeat. They were tears of freedom. Janelle, her face unchanging, her lips set tight, finally permitted herself the slightest sigh of relief. For them, it was not just money, not just property. This was justice. This was vindication. Kody, on the other hand, sat empty. His fists were clenched, his knuckles white, veins bulging as if his fury could burst through his skin. The patriarch who had held the reins of the story, who stood before cameras, grinned into confessionals, and called himself a man of vision, now sat a man with nothing. His vision crushed, his kingdom torn down, his legacy stripped naked. Robyn cried next to him, not the tears of sorrow, but the shattered sobs of someone as walls close in on all she had believed would forever endure. Mascara smudged down her face as she grasped for Kody's arm, but he did not glance her way. He could not. His gaze was fixed on Christine and Janelle. And in that instant, Christine rose, slowly, dignified. The golden light streaming through the high courthouse windows enveloped her in warmth as if the sun itself recognized this was her moment. She moved towards Kody. Her voice was soft, but it reached every corner of the courtroom. Goodbye. One word. But it was all. For years, Christine had been ignored. Her voice taken away, her suffering dismissed, her power questioned. Today, that word was her gavel, her ultimate decision, her triumph. Janelle stood with her, steady, firm. Two women, once silenced, now standing together in the light. Reporters yelled out questions. Cameras popped. Fans beyond the doors cheered. But Christine and Janelle remained silent. They didn't have to say a word. The verdict had spoken for itself. Behind them, Kody slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. The man who once claimed to carry the family was left alone in shadow. Robyn whispered desperately, "We'll fix this, right?" "We'll fix it." But her words went unanswered. The judge's gavel echoed one last time. Court is adjourned. The trial was over. But as the courtroom cleared, a single envelope fell from the defense's briefcase, falling unobserved to the floor. Its stamp was dramatic, printed in red ink. U.S. District Court, Federal Subpoena. A clerk hastened to pick it up. But one reporter saw it first. And in that moment, the story altered once more. Christine and Janelle had triumphed. Kody had lost everything. But what if this wasn't the end? What if the next fight wasn't over Coyote Pass, but over Kody Brown's freedom? The gavel had dropped. But the cliffhanger lingered. Because sometimes the most crushing verdict is still to be delivered.